is Hillary Topper from We Are Triathletes, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Will McGough. He is a travel writer and the author of Swim Bike Bonk, which I recently read, and it was an incredible book. I'm so psyched that you're here, Will, and I want to ask you all about the book. And I also want to ask you how we could, as triathletes, train under a budget, because everything's so expensive. So let's start with your journey. Tell us a little bit about your journey in Swim Bike Bonk and how you did and how you prepared for Ironman Arizona.
Totally, yeah. Well, I just want to show you because I just got the hard copies in the mail.
Nice.
So pretty cool, pretty snazzy. So we'll have to get one out to you. Yeah, thanks for all your support. I'm glad you like the book. So yeah, as we kind of talked about before, this started for me as the original project was just to do kind of a history of the Ironman leading up to the 40th anniversary. And my goal was to get immersed in the community, but not necessarily, I didn't really know what my goal was. I was just kind of going to get involved and see what happened. And originally, I thought the timeline for this was going to be much longer. But unfortunately, I was a little naive. So once it came time to get going with the book, I realized that I only had about 5 to 6 months, not only to research the whole thing, but to write it and turn it in. So this created a little bit of a problem for me in terms of, okay, well, how am I going to see this through? So I kind of made an executive decision. I was a little forced into it, obviously, with the timeline, but this was in August, and the last Ironman of the year was in November. So it was either basically do not immerse yourself, don't try and do the Ironman as you're writing this book, or get going and get on it. And I just thought, however, stupid it might sound to try and do it, I thought it would just be a really cool way to get involved and have everything be so magnified in the short training time span. So that was sort of the premise of it. And then the book now is just sort of my account of trying to go from, as they say in the cliche, zero to hero. I had never run more than 8 miles. I did not own a bike. I had basically no equipment. So yeah, that's the premise of the book. And obviously, as you know, I go through some ups and downs of the extreme variety. But yeah, to your point, I didn't have any gear or anything, so I had to kind of scrap everything together. And the Ironman is very expensive. Just to enter the race for me back in 2017 was $850. And as a writer on a very big budget, that was kind of a crazy surprise for me. And so, yeah, then, you start looking at all the gear, a bike, people are riding bikes that are $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. I was, well, I still am, but was based in Hawaii. So I was traveling to Phoenix for the race, which you have to pay for a flight and you have to check your bike. And then you need 5 nights of hotel rooms. And all told, this event cost me between $3,000 and $4,000 without even blinking an eye, just when you're getting the essentials together. So yeah, it's quite a challenge. And I think that's a big thing that triathletes come across, especially when you walk into the store without much knowledge, like I was, completely ignorant of what I actually needed and what was just an accessory to advance. Because there's a wide range of gear that starts out very basic and gets very complicated and very expensive very quick. So I don't know where the best place to start is. I mean, I guess my book, when you read it, you'll see it's broken down into chapters, obviously, but sections, and each section is started with a quote. And one of my favorites from the book, and just really as a great life philosophy I found, came from a guy named Arthur Ashe. He is a tennis player. And he says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Right? And so I was very stressed when I started this process. I walked into the bike store and, I was on a budget of about, honestly, $700-800 less if possible to buy a bike, which those of you in the biking community are probably just laughing right now, because as soon as I walked in, the first thing I noticed were tires hanging from the ceiling, and most of those individual tires cost more than $700 to $800. So I was very overwhelmed. So I kind of was really struggling with what to do. I was looking everywhere, discounts and things like that. But I guess my first piece of advice before we get into buying anything is kind of to just, use what you have and start where you can, do what you can. you have so much stuff probably around your house that you can utilize. I mean, for example, to go swimming, what do you really need, right? I found in the beginning of my training, I was using my lack of gear as an excuse not to train because, like I said, this project for me was, yeah, this was not my passion doing triathlons. So any chance I got to use something as an excuse, like, oh, well, I don't have racing goggles, so, you know, I guess I won't be swimming today. But, you know, I kind of realized that those are just excuses. So I really started digging into what I had around my apartment. And as you might remember, one of my first swim training sessions in the book, I go to the YMCA and swim in the pool, but I actually use the big block snorkeling glasses to do my first swim training. And I felt ridiculous. I looked ridiculous, but you know, I did my swim training. It didn't matter, you know? So I guess that's kind of like my first, and maybe I can throw it your way and see what you think of that. But, you know, for me, just kind of like looking around at what you have, you know, you probably already have some sort of running shoe. You know, you don't want to necessarily increase the mileage so much on those, but hey, like you can start today and go out for a run. You probably have some sort of goggles lying around your house, especially if you're living near an ocean or you know, have a swimming pool or something. So, hey, use them. You don't need a racing suit when you go on your first workout. You know, having a drag suit is totally fine. And then something as simple as like, okay, I don't have a bike, so how do I do a bike? Well, you know, gym memberships are pretty reasonable these days, so get your butt to the gym, get on a stationary bike and start pedaling. So I think my first piece of advice is just don't get so caught up in thinking, oh, I have to have all the gear, you know, right away. Like I started my training in August and I didn't have a bike until September. So, you know, the first month I just kind of made my way. And even once I got that bike, you know, then you have to kind of customize it and work on it. And sometimes it's just easier to go to the gym and ride the stationary bike. So that would be my first piece of advice. And I don't know if you find that true in your athletics, but that was a big moment for me, just realizing, hey, I got a lot around here I can use already.
Talk to us a little bit about the wetsuit. So, how did you go out and get one? I mean, what did you end up doing with that?
The wetsuit, yeah. So I delayed that as long as possible, which was probably one of my biggest mistakes. Not necessarily in training wise, because I was training in Hawaii where the water is very warm. And so I was able to put it off, whereas someone who is training in the winter somewhere may not be able to do that. So originally, the first time I really started shopping for them, my race was at the mid-November, end of November. I went to the World Championships in mid-October, and that was when I really got serious about looking for a wetsuit. And I, you know, figured I would need one with, I was surprised I need one doing the race in Arizona, but so it goes. So I started looking, I had some like recommendations for brands and stuff from friends, and I was just looking through the wetsuits at the Ironman Village of all these like high-end retailers. And, you know, the guy is showing me like wetsuits that are $900. I'm just thinking to myself, who can afford this? Who buys this? Does this actually make a difference? It was insane to me. So the cheapest one I could find there, I think was $400 or $500. And the guy was speaking in some lingo that I didn't even understand, like, oh, the neoprene is this many millimeters, which shaves this many meters per, you know, seconds per meter off your stroke, and da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, okay, whatever. I just want to get in the water and swim. I don't really know. So what I ended up doing was just going online, honestly, and buying a non-name brand wetsuit. And it cost me, I think, $170, somewhere around there, so significantly less. And because I knew that, okay, like I'm training in Hawaii, I'm not going to use this all the time. I'm just going to use it for the race essentially. And I actually surf quite a bit in it now. It still serves me well. But I don't think, you know, this leads in perfectly to kind of my next talking point, which is you have to figure out what your goals are, right? Because if you want to be a world champion, that's a lot different than if you just want to get involved and have some fun and finish the race and prove, make some accomplishments. Because when you get into bikes, when you get into running shoes, I mean, when you get into customizing the bike, like a helmet, for example, you can get a helmet from Goodwill, that's going to cost you $5 and will serve you. Or you can get a helmet that's, over $100, $200, that's aerodynamic, that according to all the research is going to save you, 6 minutes over the course of a 100-mile bike ride. Okay, that's fine. Like if you want to be a world champion, then maybe you want to save 6 minutes. But for me, it was like, okay, well, I don't need that I don't need to save 6 minutes. You know, I'm trying to just get through this and stay alive. So
Yeah.
finding out where you are and saying to yourself, okay, what matters? So you want a nice helmet? Okay, but do you need it? You know, can you get by just riding a, you know, basic Goodwill helmet? And I think the answer for most people is probably like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like 6 minutes is 6 minutes. So kind of really recognize what you need. And that's what I recognize with the wetsuit. Like, yeah, it's great. The $700 wetsuit has, you know, smaller cuts under the arms and different versions here, and it's going to save me this much time. But do I really need that? No. So I can just go and get like a basic wetsuit and just get on with it, right? Not feel like throwing money at my training is going to somehow help me, because your training comes from within, right? That makes sense?
Well, the thing about this, well, for me, was that, and I don't want to spoil the book. The book is really hysterical. It's probably one of the funniest triathlon books I have ever read, seriously.
That's nice.
But the thing about it for me was that you're really fast. I mean, your times were fast for never really riding a bike, or never really, you know, running more than 8 miles, or even swimming for that matter. So how did you, I mean, talk about your background a little bit, because I think that you know, you need to come from somewhere. You can't just start something like this and be able to do an Ironman in 3 months, right? I mean, can you?
Well, you have to read the book to see, I guess. But you know, what I learned from triathletes is that everybody does this for a different reason, right? Some people are doing it because they just want to, you know, it's a hobby. Some people are doing it, you know, for very emotional reasons. You know, they're trying to prove something to themselves or to their kids, or do something for a loved one that was lost. And these motivations can be very powerful in terms of forcing you into and pushing you beyond the limits that you would expect. Well, for me, my motivation was that now I had a book project, you know, that was kind of relying on me giving it my all, you know, and that's a very powerful motivator. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that I think you'd be surprised when you get into these kind of extreme events of just how much mental. One of my mentors in the book, BMAC, that was one of the first things he said to me, you know, is this race is 90% mental, 10% physical. And at the time that really annoyed me, because I'm like, well, then what the heck are we training for? But you know, it turned out to be pretty true. Like, you, of course, like over this distance, no matter how in shape you are, you're going to experience problems, whether they're physical, emotional, or, you know, digestive, whatever. So it's just a matter of like, are you going to get over it? Are you going to push yourself past that and allow your body to, you know, recharge and re-go? So my background, I mean, I've always been an athlete. I played volleyball in college. I played sports all growing up. But in terms of these 3 sports, my main experience was in swimming. I grew up a swimmer. I swam up until high school, so this was very early in life. But I was a pretty good swimmer, and I just swim recreationally. You know, I surf a lot. I snorkel in Hawaii, and I do that kind of stuff. So I've always been very comfortable in the water, and more importantly, I just have that muscle memory of the stroke. So getting back into that was not that difficult for me. My biggest hurdles were the bike and the run. As I mentioned, I didn't own a bike, so obviously I wasn't doing much biking. But I had some experience in the past with these kind of extreme challenges where I had done, I rode my bike across Nicaragua once as a travel writer for a travel writing story. That was over 10 days, 450 miles, so not incredible distance, but I had the mentality of what it was like to get on your bike every day and do that. And so just small things like that. And then running, I ran cross country in high school. My sister's a big runner, but you know, the furthest I'd ever run for that was 8 miles, and that was once. You know, most of the races were 5K, so, you know, it's nothing. And I'm old now, so that was a long time ago. So yeah, I mean, so it's, again, just like starting out. And in terms of what I did for training, you know, you'll see it in the book, but that's another thing. Like, you know, so many people were advising me, oh, hire a coach. You need professional assistance with this, and that can be very expensive. That is where a lot of money goes these days in this triathlon world, is, perfecting and tweaking and getting a coach to motivate you, because it is hard to get up every day and do something. So, but what I found, and that was one of the biggest money-saving things for me, is that the internet, thank God for the internet, right? There's so much stuff on the internet that, detailed training plans from coaches who are trying to make a name for themselves or whatever. So, you really don't, in my opinion, again, unless you're trying to be a world champion, you don't really need a coach, because your coach is already online, that everybody's given their advice about what they do and what works for them. And so there's all this information that I rely very heavily on in my story to, to figure out what's going to work for you. So that was a huge, money-saving technique for me. Just, again, using what you have, using what's at your disposal for free on the internet, trial and error with that sort of stuff.
So share some of your roadblocks. I know you had a lot of different roadblocks. Just share something, a mental roadblock that you had, and how you were able to overcome it, so that you could share with others, and how we could overcome those roadblocks.
Totally. Well, quite honestly, my first roadblock was that I did not even want to do it. So for me, again, this was something that I was interested in and curious about, but I was really looking for excuses in the beginning. One of my favorite parts of the beginning of the book is when I go to see my doctor to talk to him about whether or not I should do the Ironman. And really, that was a big exercise, and just trying to wiggle out of it and see, okay, maybe he's going to tell me this stuff is not very healthy. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll do some training, but I'm not going to try and go for this. But of course, as I say in the book, I get the one doctor who doesn't secretly smoke cigarettes. So of course he's like, oh, this is great, you should definitely do it, But I don't know, just sort of, for me, like, okay, there were many, of course, of just terms of getting going. But once I got going, I found there was like a big mental trap in terms of, I just always felt that triathlons were trying to take over my life, because as you expand your training, you get more and more used to pushing the limits. And when you don't push that limit, or at least you perceive you're not pushing that limit anymore, you sort of torture yourself. For example, at the height of my training, I did a 3-hour bike ride and a 7-mile run. And I'm like, wow, that was amazing. That was huge. I take a day off. The next day I do a 2-mile run, a 2-hour ride and a 5-mile run. And still, it's like, you would think from the outside, like, damn, that's impressive. Well, I just remember thinking after that, wow, like I totally slacked off. I did an hour shorter. I did 2 miles less. Like, I'm not moving in the right direction. So that was the biggest hurdle for me, sort of recognizing that you're making progress, even though it may not seem like it sometimes. Like, you're going to have bad days, you're going to have tough days, and getting through them is all about just weathering the storm. And that's why I have such respect for triathletes. They're so persistent, they're able to weather these things mentally. And it's something that only once you continue to do it over and over again, can you really beat it into your head. Like, okay, I can get through this. In terms of physically, I had much more, one of my things, and I talk about a lot of this in the book, is that to overcome my physical shortcomings, I'm going to be overly positive and mentally strong. Like, I'm not going to let anybody tell me that I can't do this or what I should be doing, and be very, rigid there with my mental outlook. So physically is where I had most of my problems. And just like, count the ways, like anything from injuries, but to just like general reality checks about, it's so easy. And I've thought about this so much since the book. Like, it's so easy to romanticize everything. And we talk about triathlons and, oh yeah, like here's what you do, swim, but everything is so superficial in terms of like what it is. But once you get into it, you see the actual reality, which is like saddle soreness, which is these digestive issues. And all these are huge parts of the race that don't really get talked about until you get in depth to it. So these physical tolls really started to add up for me, especially the saddle soreness, which is extremely uncomfortable. I know that you do some biking, so you probably are familiar. But you know, that trickled down even into my personal life and into my sex life and things like relationship with my girlfriend at the time, because it was just nothing I'd ever experienced before. And you know, you're going to read about that in the book. You'll know more about me than you ever wanted to know. So yeah, like, but that's the process, right? Like you realize, I think that's sort of the takeaway of Ironman and this experience of just, you know, one step at a time, one thing at a time, you know, go to bed and get up in the morning and deal with it. And you really have to have that mentality to get through it.
What did you think of the swim start with? It's almost like a battleground. What talk a little bit about your first experience, because this is really new to you. You've never done that before.
Yeah, everybody I talked to about the swim was preparing me essentially for aquatic combat, because they make it seem like, oh, wow, like you're going to get elbows in your face and someone's going to kick you. And if you get kicked, you're going to go down and then you're going to drown and die. And I'm like, oh, great, awesome. Well, that's awesome. So, you know, what I found is that I think triathlons realized this probably was once true, and some events still have these mass starts where everybody just goes at the same time and it's a free-for-all. But now what they do is more of a rolling start, as they call it. So they have different heats. So I only did two actual swim events. I did the Waikiki rough water swim, which was the original swim for the original Ironman on Oahu, and that still takes place every year in Honolulu. That's a 2.4 mile swim. I did that, and that was broken down into groups. You weren't necessarily seated by time, but they just kind of broke everybody up. So with that though, because it wasn't super seated necessarily, I did get a little of that when we all run. I mean, the waves are breaking. This is an ocean swim, so it's like the gun goes off and you just charge out like you're on the front line of a Braveheart movie or something, and you're crashing into the waves and swimming through, and people are, all around you, and you're kind of aware of that. The way I combated that was just sort of pure adrenaline, like, okay, I'm going to try and get out ahead of this pack and find some space. And the Ironman swim was the second one I did in Arizona, and that was a rolling start where they seated you by time, your expected time. So, you know, there was a sign for 1 hour, 1 hour, 10 minutes, 1 hour, 20 minutes. And that helped a little bit, and they bottlenecked you. So as you were coming down the stairs, kind of one jumps at a time. So actually that was less chaos than I thought, which was great. But you have a lot of people who, because of the ways the rules Ironman has with the swim, you know, it's a hard cutoff. So the sooner you start, the more time you have. So people will just see themselves improperly. So you'll have people who may be an hour and a half swimmer, an hour 45-minute swimmer, trying to get a little bit of a head start, going with 1 hour 10, 1 hour 20. And that's where you run into problems, because you're literally running over people. You know, people are going hard out of the gate, but some people are falling back. And yeah, so quite honestly, I was really stressed about that. And everything, like I said, all the stories I had read were of sort of tragedy, but I didn't really have an issue with that necessarily. But again, a lot of my strategy was like, get out and go. If I was confident of one thing, it was my swimming ability. So I figured, let's do it. You know, let's get out and go.
So let's go back to your around $4,000 investment that you made for the whole triathlon, right? So what do you think for you after competing in Ironman Arizona, thinking back to your training and everything, what was the most important investment?
Oh, that's a great question. My most important investment. Well, I guess I would say, the bike, just because that is, your major piece of equipment that you're relying on for 112 miles in the race, as well as your training. And even going back further into that, into sort of your tires, I think is a huge, something you really need to think about, because getting a flat tire, which I got two, can really derail your day and really make not only just logistically difficult, but mentally take a huge toll. But that doesn't mean you have to spend a gazillion dollars, because I think once you certainly don't want to buy a bike from Walmart, and you certainly don't want to vet it by just like riding it around the store. You want something to be properly fitted to you, and professional bike shops that you go into will do a proper fitting. I kind of cut corners a little bit. Sorry, triathlete shop, but I went in for a proper bike fitting, and they measured me all out, and they do all this for free, and they take your measurements and they gauge how far your handlebars should be, how high your seat should be based on your back position, how tall you are. They fit you to a correct size. My intention was to buy a bike from the shop, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, it was way too expensive. And believe it or not, in Hawaii, I guess I am way above the average height of people there. And so to get something of my size in stock was going to take like 9 years Hawaiian time. So I actually went on the internet, but I had all this information. And there's a great website, which I would recommend to anybody, called bikesdirect.com. And they basically, you can, shop thousands of models of bikes. And if you know what your specs are, now all of a sudden these what seems like an overwhelming amount of options is really narrowed down into what you need. And you can look in your price range and you can look at what you need. For me, I was looking for the bare minimum. I just wanted something that was going to be comfortable, that I knew would get me that distance, but also something that was going to be reliable and not, completely bust down after a couple 100 miles of training. So I think the most important thing is your bike fitting, and just how you, that should be a part of yourself, the aero bars, everything. You're going to spend a lot of time there. And then your tires, looking at the course you're going to do. For me, I was doing Ironman Arizona, and that's very famous for its goat head thorns, which will pop tires, et cetera. So just making sure you have the correct gauge of tires, where if you're going to be running over stuff, you're not going to just be super vulnerable to a flat tire. But, otherwise for the swim, what do you need? A wetsuit and yourself. And running, I mean, geez, you just put on shoes and go. So definitely for me, I think the bike is by far the most important thing.
So what surprised you the most about the journey or the race itself?
Well, I mean, it really, quite honestly, what surprises me is that so many people love it and do it. Because, and I even say, the biggest surprise to me, honestly, was that when I asked people, so many people do this, first off, and, I'm a hiker. I love physical activity. Things that I do, while they're physical, I really enjoy the act of doing it. I love hiking because I like that little bit of exercise, and then I enjoy nature and the views and with friends, and I like surfing because it's exciting, but it's physical, but you're out in the ocean, etc. So if you ask me, hey, why do you surf? I would say, oh, because I like it. Why do you hike? Oh, because I love it. But when you ask a triathlete, hey, why do you compete in Ironmans? Not one person ever said, oh, because I love swimming, biking, and running long distance. Not one person was ever like, oh my God, it's so much fun. Have you tried it? People are more akin to say oh, well, I really like the challenge of it. And that was a surprise for me, not in a bad way necessarily, but just a surprise, because I'm so used to just being around people that do activities. Okay, there's a little bit of physical side, but mostly it's because, hey, I just like this activity. And very, very, very few people will say, hey, I love long distance torture, So it's something, the sport is, there's something deeper there, where people are doing this for, as I mentioned, many different reasons, but it's not, one of them is not fun. I can't remember anybody I saw having fun at the Ironman. My sister was a big marathon runner. I've been to many marathons. I've never seen her have fun at a race. So just sort of the idea of this sport is so popular, it's growing like a weed, and expensive. You would, okay, if it's free, but people are dropping $850 plus. Mine was $4,000 on a budget, dropping all this money, and then they don't even consider it fun. I was coming back from La Paz, Mexico, just 2 days ago from a travel writing trip, and the Ironman 70.3 was in Cabo. So across the aisle from me was a triathlete, and I started talking to him about it, and he travels all over the world to do these events. And I said, are you staying down here in Cabo? He's like, oh no, I just came down for the race. That's what I do. I just use the Ironman as a platform to travel. He's like, oh, next year I'm going to go to New Zealand to do this. And I'm talking about it. I'm like, oh, well, did you have fun? He's like, oh, well, it was hot, and, I didn't eat enough, and so I felt pretty bad a lot of the time. And he's just telling me like a normal race report, but it's like filled with misery. And I'm thinking, now he's telling me how he uses this as a platform for travel. I'm like, dude, why don't you just travel? Like, why are you doing this? Like, he's like, yeah, it's a good reason to like, go to New Zealand. I'm like, I can think of like so many good reasons to go to New Zealand. So that was just surprising to me, this mentality, and it's kind of funny, and it still kind of baffles me in a way that, but hey, you can't explain love, I guess.
Right. Well, if nobody has any questions, that was a half hour, so that the timing worked out perfect. And thank you so much. It was a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Again, I love this book. I thought it was so fun, and it just kept my interest. And Will, you really are a fantastic writer. Kudos to you for doing this. Swim, Bike, Bonk.
Excellent.
And
Appreciate
yeah,
it.
so
You too, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope other people enjoyed it as well.
I'm sure they will. All right, take care.
Hi, Hillary. Thanks.